All right, let's talk Dallas Cowboys. I'm Nick, and this is our daily Cowboys show. The Dallas Cowboys, of course, trying to move on as best as they can from a disappointing performance last Sunday. Of course, the trade deadline is getting closer and closer, and we got a lot of news to get to, as always. But first, as we love to do on this channel, let's get things started with a little stat of the day, a little palate cleanser, if you will. Let's pull up this image courtesy of the DLLS Cowboys podcast that they put together on social media. I thought it was very interesting. So looking at the Cowboys defense statistically and some scheme changes that Eberflus, and I think with some oversight from Schotty, implemented over the past 2 weeks. So in weeks 1 through 6, they used man coverage 7.8% of the time, zone coverage 85.0% of the time, blitz rate 21.0% of the time, pressure rate was 38.5%, and the time to throw was 2.99 seconds. Compare that to weeks 7 and 8, where their man coverage jumped almost 30% to 37.2%. Their zone coverage dropped by about 30%, makes sense, to 55.4%. Blitz rate increased by about 15% to 36.2%. Pressure rate stayed roughly flat, 36.2%. And time to throw dropped slightly, but I mean, that's basically noise, basically the same level, 2.93 seconds. So there's a lot of people, as has been the case for most of the season, that after a Cowboys' poor defensive performance, and even after one of their rare good ones, have been calling for the firing of Matt Eberflus, saying he's just not getting it done. His scheme is garbage. He's too stubborn. All of these elements. And listen, maybe he's not a good enough teacher. Maybe he's not a good enough communicator. Maybe he hasn't built a good enough defensive staff. And all of those things are certainly very valid and certainly things that are worth evaluating. But the reality is, he certainly is not stubborn. He's, as you can see by the data, and we watch the games, you can see the massive change in scheme. He's the opposite of stubborn. He listened to feedback. He listened to everybody. He listened to Schotty and implemented massive wholesale changes. We're talking massive personnel changes as well. I think, again, Schotty directed a lot of that, but we've seen a lot of changes over the past, 6-7 weeks. Sam Williams, for example, his snap counts have dropped from starter level weeks 1 and 2 to basically 15, 16 snaps a game, 18 snaps a game, right? Basically, he's a backup now, even though he starts the game as a first stringer. Ezraku, meanwhile, for the past month and a half, has led this Cowboys edge group in snaps on a game-by-game basis. Jadeveon Clowney's getting more reps, right? So they've been making a lot of personnel changes, I think good ones. They've made a lot of scheme changes that everyone's been clamoring for. So at this point, there's a lot of people out there that still want Matt Eberflus fired. And listen, maybe he's a bad teacher, right? Maybe he's just a horrible communicator. Maybe he's a poor leader of the defensive coaching staff. And if that's the case, maybe he deserves to get fired, right? But based on what we know, again, we're not in the locker room. We're not on that team. We do not know what that element is. We can only look at what we see from a defensive coordinator perspective. And what we see personnel changes, good ones. We see scheme changes that a lot of people have been clamoring for and that were effective in one game, not so effective in the other game. Listen, at a certain point, like I've said before, it's a talent problem. And that's not on Eberflus, at least not this year. And so for people still clamoring for you to fire the defensive coordinator, and maybe he'll deserve it, right? Maybe he'll put together, enough poor performances and things will go bad enough that, Schotty and company says, listen, we need to change, right? You're not the right teacher. You're not the right communicator. And maybe that is the case. And if that is the case, then maybe he deserves to be fired. But if you're just looking at the data we have, like you see on the screen in front of you, the guy's changed his scheme. He's not stubborn. He listened to feedback. He changes personnel. At a certain point, you have to ask yourself, is it defensive coordinator or is it the talent? Maybe it's both. But like I said yesterday, and I think this data supports it, Matt Eberflus, he may not be the solution, but he certainly isn't the problem. All right, let's get into the news here. I want to talk about this, I think, pretty big announcement that came down yesterday. This is courtesy, or I guess the day before yesterday. Todd Archer, beat reporter for the Cowboys over at ESPN, he says, Brian Schottenheimer said there will be changes going forward. Don't specify what will change or who will change. Said the Arizona game represents a, quote, one-game season, but not in a dramatic way. More about the bye week coming after playing the Cardinals. So I think this is a huge statement here. A lot of people kind of were curious by it. Like, well, he's talking about changes, but he's giving a one-game season. Why not make some changes now? Why wait to see what happens against the Arizona Cardinals? What does one-game season mean going into the bye week? And I think it's important for people to understand that a lot of changes, as we all know, usually happen over the bye week. But let's look at the context here with the Dallas Cowboys and where they are right now, certainly on defense, but you could look across the roster as a whole. Right, DeMarvion Overshown's returning, right, after the bye. So is Chavon Revel. So we got two young defensive players potentially getting into the fold. Malik Hooker should be back at that point as well by all projections. We've got other news about the other safeties' injuries in just a second. But going into the bye week and coming out of it, they should be, barring something, drastic Monday night, relatively healthy, right? Injuries are going to happen, of course. You're dealing with them. But this is going to be an opportunity, I think, and Schottenheimer's really laying down the law here for some of these guys that haven't been playing well to really make sure they actually have a job come out of the bye week. And I mean that. I think this is what he's calling out. I think the staff, his coaches, but most importantly, the players. Hey, listen, Kenneth Murray. Hey, listen, Shamar James. Hey, listen, Maris Leofau. Overshown's back. You want to play football for this team? You prove it against Arizona. Hey, the cornerback room, Kyer Elam, Bridges, right? Bland, I think, is probably pretty safe because he's playing good football. Do you guys want to actually play on this team the rest of the season? Prove it against Arizona because we got Revel. We'll throw a rookie out there and see how he does. I think they're going to play him anyway. But again, it speaks to what the Cowboys are trying to do here. They're trying to send a message. This is a one-game season for a lot of these players. How about defensive end? I talked about Sam Williams, right? They already have 5 defensive ends they dress. They have Houston as a pass rush specialist. They start Williams and Fowler. Fowler has kind of disappeared. His analytics look fine, and we'll get to that in a second. It's kind of interesting there, but Sam Williams has just not been a good player. He'll have a random play every now and then, a crazy tackle for loss where it looks like a freak athlete. He had that against Denver, for example, but he just disappears for the vast majority of the game. Those guys, hey man, you want to be a starter? Or do you want to see your reps continue to dwindle? One game season, right? Because we're going to give Ezraku the starting reps. We're going to give Jadeveon Clowney starting reps. We're going to give James Houston more reps coming out of the bye potentially, right? And those guys are already getting more reps. We could see that trend dramatically continue coming into the bye. How about Guyton and potentially Terrence Steele at tackle? Hey man, you want to prove you can be a starting tackle for this team? We got Nathan Thomas. He stepped up. He's a guy that has a lot of potential. If you don't step up against Arizona, maybe we'll replace you with Nathan Thomas coming out of the bye. How about the coaches? I know I just mentioned Eberflus. I don't think he's in danger of getting fired. But listen, if you don't put together a good game plan, if you don't get the players to buy in, maybe we see some changes coming into the bye. Right? There's a lot of things in front of the Dallas Cowboys before they go head into their bye after Monday Night Football. And I think what Schottenheimer's doing here is basically laying down the law. He's calling out his team. And there's a lot of positions on this team where there's a lot of guys that aren't playing well, obviously, certainly on defense, corner, safety, linebacker, defensive end. You could look at offensive tackle on offense where, that's probably the one area where they need significant improvement, right? And I think wide receiver, they're good. Tight end, they're good. Quarterback, running back. I think interior offensive line, I think they're good in all those positions. I think that's fair. Offensive tackle is maybe the only one with Nathan Thomas, maybe, where you could see a change. That's just my assessment. I'm sure a lot of you guys agree. But certainly on defense, right? He's calling them out. Coaches. Position coaches too, by the way. Listen, it's a one-game season. Prove your worth. If not, we'll replace you. Schotty, will take ownership of this and enforce drastic changes, right? Overshown will take more reps. He'll take somebody's spot. Revel will take more reps. He'll take somebody's spot. Safety position may get reshuffled. Defensive end position may get reshuffled. This is what you want from the Dallas Cowboys. And this is, I think, probably the biggest move Schotty has made this season. And he's made a lot of big moves, especially when you look at defensively, of course. Push for the Jadeveon Clowney signing. Push to give Shamar James in the game, really benching Damone Clark, giving Leofau more reps, right? He's pushed for Ezraku, although I think everyone was in agreement on that. I don't think there was any real hesitancy from anyone in the Dallas Cowboys ownership down to the position coaches saying, listen, after the first couple weeks of the season, got to give Ezraku more reps. He's becoming a good player. Across the board, Schotty has pushed pretty significant changes. And I think he says, listen, coming into this game and after this game, we're going to make some big decisions. And if you want to be a football player for the Dallas Cowboys, if you want to be a starter, if you want to keep your job, you're going to have to prove it. You got a one-game season to do it. And I love that approach. It's different from Mike McCarthy, certainly different than Jason Garrett and Wade Phillips. And in some ways, it's even different than Bill Parcells. I think Schotty recognizes, I think correctly, that there's a lot of guys on this team that, just aren't playing anywhere remotely close to good enough football. And there's young guys that are ready to at least try and take their spots. And even some veteran guys. You look at Clowney at defensive end, Houston at defensive end, for example, right? I could see, I wouldn't be surprised at all coming out of Monday Night Football if some veteran guys get cut and some veteran guys definitely get benched. I think this defense is going to look a lot different coming out of the bye, just personnel-wise. I think Schotty has given these guys a one-game chance. Not in like a threatening way, right? Like Todd Archer mentions here. This isn't like this is the season, this is the year right here. It comes down to this must-win game. That's not what he's saying. He said, listen, we're heading into the bye on the other side of this. We got a lot of guys coming back from injury, right? We got Perry and Winfrey eventually, theoretically, would come back maybe at some point too at defensive tackle, right? You got Revel, you got Overshown, you got Butler maybe too at some point, right? Kalen Carson has come back from injury. You got, they haven't done much with him at this point, but we'll see what happens there. Maybe he gets more playing time. This is an opportunity for anyone that's currently playing for the Dallas Cowboys that has a job to prove that they deserve it, to earn it. And I love that approach. So listen, you've had a body of work up to this point. Even a guy like Bridges, who's had to step up because of the injury. Listen, man, you played 2 full games at this point. You get a third, right? Look at the linebacker position. Kenneth Murray. Listen, you played a lot of football. It's not been very good most of the year. Now's your chance. Shamar James, you've had some great games, had some duds. What do you got? Maris Leofau, you're a thrill a minute. Can you be more consistent, right? The list goes on and on with a bunch of different players. This is a smart move by Schotty. I love this approach. Set up this opportunity, see who's ready to step up, see who's clutch, see who's a competitor, see who's going to take advantage of the opportunity in front of them, and really show they deserve to hold on to their job. Because there's some young talent coming back into the fold, and there's a lot of changes that I think we're going to see on this personnel. Look, this Cowboys team, especially on defense, the way it's structured right now, that's not going to be the 2026 Cowboys defense. It just isn't. Fowler's going to be gone, right, for sure. Murray is all likelihood going to be gone, right? You look at the secondary, Kyrie Elam, they may bring him back, but he's probably gone. Hooker and Wilson are gone, most likely. Listen, the reality is these guys are just, the defense next year is going to look completely different, right? You may have Shamar James, Leofau, Overshown, and probably another linebacker. You're going to have different defensive ends, right? I think you're going to have Revel as one of the corners, Deron Blaine as a corner. Maybe Reddy Stewart can be a piece, going forward. He's looking like a good, versatile, utility piece. But for the most part, the vast majority of the defense is going to be different in 2026 than it is right now. And he's saying, listen, if you want to be part of the future, now's your chance Monday night to show that you belong. And it's a 1-game season for you. And I am here for this approach 100% from Schottenheimer. I think it's his biggest move yet. Set the pressure for his players and be honest about it. He's not being mean. He's not trying to be dramatic. He's not sitting there saying like, this is it. I'm done with you guys. No, he's like, hey, guys, this is football. You get 1 game. See what you got. If not, we're going to bring in someone to replace you. In terms of Overshown, Revel, other personnel decisions, moving people around. I think it's a good approach. I think it's the right move. All right, let's get into some injury updates here from Todd Archer once again. Brian Schottenheimer said Elijah Clark is likely to miss Monday's game versus Arizona with the rib issue. Hopeful on Donovan Wilson's return, but unsure on Wanye Thomas. We are thin at that spot. He set up the safety position. Yeah, that's putting it mildly considering, Hooker, of course, is already out as well. Obviously, they have Bell as one of their safeties, but they're just incredibly thin. I think Marquise Bell's a special teams guy who's getting an opportunity. We'll see how he does. Hasn't done too well, to be honest, but listen, he's a special teams guy. You look at Wanye Thomas getting an opportunity too. Hopefully, he can return from the migraine issue. It's a weird deal there. It's such a bummer. It's one of those things when it's not your year, it's not your year in a lot of instances where you've got a guy in Wanye Thomas who gets his opportunity because of an injury to Malik Hooker. He's been waiting for this, and now he's dealing with migraines. You're just like, gee whiz, it just can't catch a break, right? It just happens. Some years it's your year. Some years, breaks go against you. And right now, at least on defense, a lot of breaks are going against these young players like Wanye Thomas, who I think a lot of us are really excited to see. Hopefully he can return and play against the Arizona Cardinals Monday night and beyond. Donovan Wilson returning. Obviously, Wilson has had a bad year, but listen, they kind of need bodies at a certain point at the safety position who can actually, line up and, know the calls, at least know the calls, maybe not execute them perfectly all the time, of course, but at least, can understand what's being called. So it's going to be a challenge there with the injuries at safety for sure. This Cowboys team, they've gotten healthier, but they've never gone into a moment where you feel like this Cowboys team is 100% playing like it was drawn up. And listen, every team is dealing with injuries for the most part. I think the Broncos are actually one of the healthier teams in football. So are the Colts. No surprise, those are 2 teams playing very well. But the reality is every team deals with injuries. Every team's beat up across a number of positions. The Cowboys obviously are no exception. So listen, you got to find a way to power through it. It's just the way it works in the National Football League. It's just when your defense is already this bad, the margin of error just gets really, really small when you have injuries at a key position like safety. All right, let's get into this report that raised a lot of eyebrows. This is courtesy of John Machota over The Athletic. Cowboys owner Jerry Jones on 105.3 The Fan on Dallas's pass rushing group. In terms of numbers, in terms of players that can rush the passer, we've got the best numbers that we've had. All right, when I first read this, my eyebrows went, that doesn't seem right at all. And I know a lot of people on social media and across the Cowboys fanscape saw this and were like, what the heck is Jerry Jones talking about? He's off his rocker, right? There are people that range from, all right, he's lost it, or he's trying to spin something that's not there. What the heck is he talking about? There's no numbers in the world. There's nothing in the universe that could support this assessment from Jerry Jones, from Jerry Jones. What is he talking about? This makes no sense. He's lost it. He's trying to sell us a bill of goods, right? Just what the heck is Jerry Jones saying and doing? Oh my goodness, this is what we're talking about, right? With Jerry Jones and the Cowboys and the mismanagement and all the concerns. Everybody and their grandmother started saying that. I started saying that. I'm like, what the heck is Jerry Jones talking about? And then when I went on to prepare for my main NFL channel content, which the SMI Cowboys show was just part of the SMI brand overall, I had a few articles and research points come up, not Cowboys related, they just come up related to other things that I thought was very surprising. Again, this was not anything forwarded to me by a Cowboys content creator or a Cowboys researcher. This is just stuff I naturally stumbled upon. Let's go into the first one. This is courtesy of the X account NFL Draft Files. Donovan Ezraku has a 23.9% pass rush win rate over his last 3 games. And then I noted it's reportedly 4th in the NFL during that time frame, ahead of, among other names, a certain edge rusher in Green Bay. All right, so Donovan Ezraku is playing good football. I mean, that's not a surprise. We know he's playing better and better, especially after a slow start to the season rushing the passer. He's starting to figure things out. He's obviously leading the edge group in snaps, getting more and more snaps, and playing good football. But again, this is one guy, right? This is Ezraku, right? What the heck is Jerry Jones talking about? Okay, he just likes Ezraku. Okay, fine. He's still, maybe he's just watching number 41. He's a good player, good rookie, good second rounder. Okay, but this still doesn't excuse what the heck he's talking about originally, right? Then I came across this other analysis. So this is pass rushing rates at edge in 2025 for starters, right? Just only focus on guys who start the game. And I want you guys to focus on the y-axis there. That's the pass rush win rate. And it's kind of a chart here with the names here, but I want you guys to focus kind of in the middle there. You see Dante Fowler Jr., right above Daniel Hunter and Trey Hendrickson and Boye Mafe, a little bit below there, Will Anderson Jr. Dante Fowler Jr. is pretty high up in pass rush win rate. In fact, he's almost as high as Micah Parsons and Myles Garrett, and he's ahead of Trey Hendrickson, which obviously I think is high praise. But he's also ahead of, if you go down a little bit more underneath Dante Fowler, DeMarcus Lawrence, now with the Seattle Seahawks, of course, former Cowboy. So, and significantly ahead of DeMarcus Lawrence. So that made me go, wow, okay. So there's a Fowler winning these pass rush opportunities. Well, okay, maybe that's interesting. That certainly doesn't feel that way. And then you go down a little bit more into the sort of the below average. You see Sam Williams there, right? Below average and on the right. His pass rush win rate, it's above Aiden Hutchinson. It's above TJ Watt. It's above Thibodeau for the New York Giants, who's a good player, right? It's certainly not elite, but it's a good number in terms of comparison to others. And I say good number in the context of Sam Williams has reportedly, and I think we've all seen this on the broadcast footage, and the film bears this out too, has had a really rough season. And yet the pass rush win rate is above guys like Watt, Thibodeau, Byron Young, right? Rashawn Gary, Leonard Floyd, Bradley Chubb. I mean, these are numbers that are shocking. And so I don't know if I should believe these numbers or not, guys, right? And it just to circle back to Jerry Jones's initial comments, he says in terms of numbers, in terms of players that can rush the passer, we've got the best numbers that we've had. And a lot of people, again, what the heck is he talking about? Then you have Ezraku, who's a top 5 edge rusher in terms of pass rush win rate over the past 3 games. And then you look at the other numbers here. You've got Fowler, who's got a good number, well above average. And even Sam Williams, while he's a little below average, he's their number 3 guy, ostensibly as a defensive end here in this situation, pass rusher. And he's well above a lot of other names. And that's not even counting guys like James Houston, who's had a few moments as well this season. So it's very interesting. When is Jerry Jones not off his rocker here? It's an interesting debate. Now, I'm going to be totally honest. When I look at these stats, I feel like that's sort of not the whole story. I feel like they're heavily inflated based on 2 really good pass rush performances. You look at the Jets game specifically, and you look at, of course, the Washington Commanders game where they got a lot of pass rush opportunities late in the game, second half when they were up big. So I think the numbers are heavily skewed to 2 stellar performances, right? That's my sort of gut feeling. But it is interesting because when you look at Jerry Jones's comments initially, I mean, everyone's like, yeah, he's an idiot. He's lost it. Or he's trying to sell us a bill of goods that isn't real. But when you look at the numbers, it's one of those things. I'm talking about the scientific method. The observation, right, this pass rush stinks. And then you look at the numbers and you're like, numbers don't back that up, right? I tested it with the data. Do we have to rethink our hypothesis about the pass rush? And I kind of wonder here for a second are we just so spoiled as Cowboys fans because we watched the greatest, as I call it, the greatest one-trick pony in recent NFL history, where the Dallas Cowboys under Dan Quinn and their front office created a pass rushing group unprecedented in modern NFL history and a secondary that jumped everything? and a defense that could overwhelm average and inferior opponents and struggle against the good ones, right? Is that what we were just spoiled by with Micah Parsons and that pass rush group that could do things like that? Where we just have this expectation of what elite pass rushing looks like, top two, top three, greatest one-trick pony, as I say, in recent NFL history. And obviously they're not nearly as good as that, but are we spoiled by that context? Right? Do we remember those days with Parsons and DeMarcus Lawrence in 2023, 2022, Randy Gregory when he was involved with the team, just getting after the quarterback all the time, full speed ahead, reckless abandon, jumping every route at the defensive back position, making all those big plays? Are we kind of spoiled by that in terms of what we expect? It's interesting to think about. It's a weird thought experiment, right? It's sort of like, you watch this great pass rushing effort, maybe the best pass rushing team in the NFL year after year after year for 3-4 years, and now they're just okay. Now they're solid with Ezraku playing better, and obviously they no longer have Michael Parsons, or in DeMarcus Lawrence too, of course. And you're sort of like, hey, are they actually not bad rushing the passer? It's one of those things, right? It's context, right? Context matters. If you go from really special pass rushing to just above average, and you just sit there and think, oh, it's a massive drop off. Now we stink at rushing the passer. The numbers don't back that up. The numbers actually, as crazy as this sounds, supports what Jerry Jones is saying. It's a weird thing. I mean, I go back and forth on this. I think the Cowboys are not a good pass rushing team personally, right? I think they're heavily inflated and skewed to a couple good games, specifically Fowler, who had a monster game against the Jets that could not block him at all. I don't know what his win rate was, but it's one of those things. If you have his win rate for the year sits right around 20%. But if you look at 8 games, and let's say you have just a game where you go off, it can certainly skew it. And obviously Ezraku is playing better football. He's evolved in basically to what I think the next DeMarcus Lawrence. So that's a good thing there. They let Lawrence walk. They got younger and maybe even better. Certainly as good, in my opinion, going to become that kind of player, and is already in some ways as good as Lawrence was. I mean, not quite 100% there yet, but he's in that trajectory. So you got Ezraku, who looks good. You look at Fowler, and I mean, even St. Williams' numbers. It is weird. It is weird, guys. I mean, I hate to say it, but the numbers support what Jerry Jones is saying. Now, I don't really believe these numbers. I'll go out and say I think this is skewed. But it is interesting, right? It's one of those things where it goes back to what I talk about all the time about the scientific method, where you make an observation, the pass rush stinks. You form a hypothesis, the pass rush is not very good because the pass rush stinks. And then you look at the numbers, you test it with the data, and the data doesn't support it. If the data doesn't support the hypothesis, you reject the hypothesis, right? You reform the hypothesis. That's the scientific method. Maybe this pass rush doesn't stink. Maybe they're just average, right? Maybe they're a decent pass rush, which means the problem lies in the secondary and linebackers, which is something to consider. All right, this next report is courtesy of a content creator. I'm sure a lot of you guys are familiar with this guy. Foots the King is what he goes by. And he was watching some film and commenting on it. I just want to point this out here. And Kyrie Elam was in a run defense. He did not do a good job. He said, watch Elam on this rep. And I just have a screenshot of the rep there. You don't really see Elam in the picture that much. But he says, this isn't coaching, this is heart, right? In terms of talking about Elam's performance. Now, look, I don't know Foots the King personally. I don't know who he is. I don't know, what he's done in terms of content. I know he's much larger than I am, and he's very successful. So obviously I'm not, going at him for that. But I do think, maybe he has, but unless you've played football, I'll say this, at a high level or coached, and I'll say collegiately or professionally, do not criticize someone's heart. Do not criticize. You can criticize their performance for sure. You can sit there and say, I don't like how well you played. I think you played poorly. I think you missed tackles. I think you didn't cover well, whatever it may be. I think you missed blocks. You can criticize performance. Do it all day long. That's your right as anyone can, of course. But I think you cross a line when you criticize a grown man's heart. Unless you've never... Now, listen, if you played, like, for example, if Deion Sanders or Michael Irvin criticizes, a player's heart for the Cowboys, I take note of that because they know what it's like. They know what it's like to play in the NFL. They know what heart is. When Troy Aikman does it, Emmitt Smith does it, for example, list a million other guys, they know what that is, right? They know what that heart really is. I mean, listen, I play college football, and even I would be extremely hesitant for 1 second to criticize an NFL player's heart and effort. I don't think that's right. I think that's just wrong to do, right? I don't go into your job and sit there and say, hey, this was a terrible X post. Your heart's garbage heart, right? Your effort's terrible. You're lazy, right? In some ways, this is almost attacking, Kyrie Elam's manhood a little bit. You're doing it from the safety of a computer. Would you do this to his face? I don't think so, right? And we criticize players, and listen, I've been in film rooms with coaches, right? And they criticize players relentlessly all the time. I mean, terrible technique, terrible results, right? I've been dressed down. My teammates have been dressed down. It's part of life, right? Just is the way it is. But like that's internal, right? That doesn't go public, right? In terms of individual plays and individual games of you just having garbage days. Everyone has garbage days. I've had, gee whiz, I've had some big ones. But I do think what we're seeing here from Foots the King, I think this is wrong, right? Because this is one of those things where if Kyrie Elam had a one-on-one situation with you in a private room, you guys have a very, very frank discussion about this. But Kyrie Elam can't respond, right? Because you hide behind a computer when you're criticizing his heart. And I think that's wrong. Criticize his performance. Look at the technique, sit there and say this is a bad job of a run fit. This is a poor tackle. That's fine, by all means. But when you criticize someone's heart, effort, manhood, like we see here, I think that's crossing a line, especially when you're hiding behind a computer. That's just my take as a former player. All right, this next report is per John Machota over at The Athletic. Cowboys owner Jerry Jones on 105.3 The Fan when asked if he thinks cornerback Trevon Diggs has played his last game for the Cowboys. I don't see that today at all. He's got to get well, and he hasn't been. Yeah, so the Diggs saga continues to take all these turns. I mean, it looked like he was probably on his way out, maybe to get traded on IR. I don't know if anyone saw this, but Micah Parsons felt like the Cowboys did him wrong, saying he was coming off a major knee injury, and they rushed him into the starting lineup. I don't think the Cowboys did him wrong. I think Diggs brought a lot of this on himself, if we're being totally honest. And I don't mean to pick on Diggs here, but listen, he didn't do his rehab at the Cowboys facility, which is fine. He's not required to, so he sacrificed that amount of money. But if there was any inkling that he didn't feel like he wasn't going to be ready early in the season, right, he didn't give the Cowboys training staff any evaluation time at all. I mean, we've seen the Cowboys training staff historically for the past, at least 5 years, probably further back, where they've been very cautious with rushing players back, extremely cautious, right, in terms of, listen, we're going to take our time. I remember Deron Bland last year, he was a week away for a month, right? They were so cautious with Deron Bland. They do this all the time with a lot of players. And I think they would have been that same way with Diggs, potentially, if Diggs really wasn't ready, if he had been there during the entire process. And listen, Trevon Diggs, he made that choice. He's fine to do it. And he was ready. And he showed up and actually played pretty well week one, if we're being totally honest. But then I think you had, the Micah Parsons trade issues. I think he was just upset. The scheme issues, not seeing eye to eye with Eberflus, the locker room stuff. I think there's a lot of things going on here with Trevon Diggs. I don't think it's all physical. I think there's a lot of mental stuff there too. Just, the issues with Eberflus, his best friend being traded. It just was, seems to be a little bit of a tough time for Diggs in terms of that situation. And listen, I think the injuries and the knee reportedly that they're talking about with Diggs now isn't the same knee that was hurt last year. So I don't think it was one of those deals unless, maybe he was trying to overcompensate and he tweaked his other knee, trying to protect his reconstructed knee. I mean, it's a hard to tell situation. It's a very fluid deal with Trevon Diggs. But it's so disappointing because honestly, it's clear they need him, right, in terms of cornerback position until Revel can play or until Revel proves he can play. I mean, listen, Bridges played his heart out. He competed his butt off. But and Elam did not have a good game either. But they need more corners out there, right? Bridges and Elam just aren't the answer. They can sort of maybe survive, maybe, probably not, if we're being honest with those guys. But with Diggs, they actually can play better at that position, right? Obviously, I mean, I think Diggs ever since the rough Giants game and the really rough Bears game, at least the big play surrendered early on, he's actually played decent football, not perfect, but decent football. Certainly not up to his contract, right? But that's a different discussion in terms of should he be cut or not. But he's been playing at least a starter. Elam and Bridges have not been playing anywhere remotely close to starter level. And so obviously Diggs being hurt really hurts Dallas. It just does. And it's just a weird situation. It's I don't know what to think with this Diggs deal. Every single day there's a new report, new indication. And I think the Cowboys, Jerry Jones, Schottenheimer, they've been very clear. We want him around here. And just for whatever reason, I think we all look at this situation yeah, he's going to be cut in the offseason. He's going to be a veteran post-June 1st release for cap space. Why do they want to keep him around? Why are they making such a big effort? And maybe it's because they look at their cornerback position and my God, we have no bodies until Revel can play, until Butler can play, until Kalen Carson has any sort of faith or Eberflus has any sort of faith in Carson, right? They just say, listen, it's a body's problem. Maybe that's the reason. But it's just such a weird situation with Diggs. I think at a certain point, I mean, if he's physically ready, after 4 games and comes back and plays well, great. But I'm really curious to see what happens long term in terms of with Trevon Diggs. I wouldn't be surprised if they shut him down in a couple weeks for the season, right? If they just say, hey, he's done. It just feels that way, right? It just feels like the end. Even though the Cowboys don't want it to be, it just feels that way. All right, let's get into the comments section, getting started with our member comments as we always do. That's my promise to members. I will address every single member comment and address them first. So if you want to make sure your voice gets heard, become a member. Greatly appreciate all our members. David Dobbins 5887 writes, I personally think this was a planned build the offense year, so they gave Flus trash hoping he could do something. I think Pickens' trade actually surprised them, and the entire offense took a huge leap. Zone wins and playoffs. Flus is 100, so next year less trash, more players will equal more success. We've got 4 defensive players coming off IR that should make the defense more competitive. I agree with everything you said there. If you look at the moves the Cowboys made this offseason, right, their first-round pick, offense. The big trade they made, the big deal by far, offense with Pickens. How about their new head coach? Offense, right? Everything they did this offseason was oriented to the offense. All of their second-tier moves, their second-round pick, defense. Heck, even their third-round pick was a defender, but he was injured, right? He was not going to be an impact player, right? It's one of those things where they made all of their big moves for the offense. They're spending more money on the offense, right? Big quarterback dollars, obviously big CeeDee Lamb dollars, right? You look at, they extended Tyler Smith, extended Jason Ferguson. Listen, they extended Osa Digizua and Deron Bland, but they traded away Micah Parsons. So it's every move the Cowboys made up to week 1 was, focusing on the offense, prioritizing the offense for sure. And so Eberflus was dealt a really rough hand. The argument with Eberflus is, again, like I said before, is he the right teacher? Can he maximize the talent? Now, there's an argument to be made that the talent is so bad right now, especially in the secondary and at linebacker sometimes as well, where there maybe not be anything to maximize, right? As sad as that sounds. And I think that could be the criticism of Eberflus. Maybe there is more talent there and he's not maximizing it. Maybe it isn't. Maybe he's not the right teacher. Maybe he's not the right communicator, right? It's a tough situation, but I agree with you 100% that I don't think anyone for the offense, Dallas, expected them to be this good. And, Pickens has surprised to the upside. CeeDee Lamb is obviously outstanding. Young Booker's a physical beast. Guyton's got his flaws, but he's mauling people. I mean, every single game I watched it against the Denver Broncos, you can find probably 7 or 8 highlights of the Cowboys' offensive line, even if it's a bad offensive play, just mauling people. Booker driving people off the yard, ball 10, 15 yards, right? You look at Guyton, knocking people down, right? Even on bad plays, even on bad series, they're a physical bunch. They're a young bunch and a physical bunch with a lot of good players that, with the exception of Pickens and Javonte Williams, are going to be here already for a long time. So again, the offense sort of surprised to the upside for sure. The defense is surprised to the downside, and so here we are. This next comment is from Fixed50Tim. Jerry's the type of guy to walk into a locker room after giving up 700 yards in offense and say, I'm proud of how calm you guys handled that situation out there. I mean, to be fair, when you're the big boss, the CEO, the owner, right, you kind of have to be that way. I know when I've worked in corporate America, when the big-time CEO would come to, talk to the troops, big boss, he would always say nice things to people at my level, right? I was obviously lower level. And then I would talk to sort of my boss's bosses or my bosses that interacted with him in more serious discussions. And he would say, oh man, he ripped us a new one. He destroyed us, right? So when the owner comes in and talks to the players, it's sort of that relationship, I feel like, where he wants to be more positive. He wants to be more, hey, good job, good effort out there. And I think that's the right approach to take. Now, I know as a fan that can be frustrating, but the reality is you want the owner to be the guy that stands for his players. Let's look at the Jets. Their owner, Woody Johnson, who's been taking a lot of criticism. He came out recently and publicly attacked their starting quarterback, Justin Fields. Now, whether Fields deserves it or not, how good is that for a locker room? How good is that for a situation? Do you want Jerry Jones to be that way? No, I think Jerry Jones, when he's positive in terms of talking about the players to the media, is the right approach. I think that's the way you have to do it, right? Because if you don't, 1, it becomes a distraction, but 2, it doesn't make players want to play for you. It doesn't want to make players come to Dallas. It doesn't want to make players happy in the organization, right? And I think Jerry Jones, to his credit, you talk to basically any former player and any current player, They love Jerry Jones. They love the money he spent on the Cowboys. Everyone understands he's a circus in Dallas with the media hype and attention, and a lot of that is Jerry Jones doing, of course. But he spends money on his players. He spends money on the franchise. I mean, there's a recent interview with Zach Martin where he said, listen, Jerry Jones, he spends a lot of money to make everything top-notch, everything first class for the players. So I think a lot of players actually really appreciate Jerry Jones. And it's, as a fan, it can be kind of, unfortunate the interactions we hear sometimes, but from a player perspective, he actually is pretty good. Chris Oldham writes, Eberflus, keep him for at least another year. 3 different DCs in 3 years. 4 in 4 years if you fire Eberflus. By the way, that's actually a great point. If you fire Eberflus, you're talking 4 different DCs in 4 years. In fact, if you fire Eberflus mid-season, you would talk 5 ostensibly in 4 years. But, so because you would have your interim DC and then you have a new DC in the offseason. I mean, is that what good teams do? Is that what good programs do? Right? It's a question, right? It's a fair question. How can any sane fan expect a competent defense given the personnel he inherited, plus the Parsons debacle, plus all the injuries, tear it down and rebuild around the core players plus free agents and draft picks that match Eberflus' scheme? He has switched up the scheme since the start of the season, but he's faced a revolving door of players available week to week. Please, guys, sanity and patience are needed this year. Name me the defensive genius you believe you could turn this cast of characters into a winning defense. The answer is there is none. Now, you can make an argument there's a different defensive coordinator and a different defensive staff that could have them playing better. Maybe instead of the 31st ranked or 32nd ranked defense, depending on what metric you use, they could be 28th, they could be 27th. And you can have a lot of people in Cowboys Nation. They can see if they'd be a better defense, maybe they'd be 5-3 right now or whatever, right? And they'd be on their way to finish 11-6 or 10-7 and losing the wild card round again. If they only had a better defensive coordinator, we would be a mediocre wild card team, right? That's sort of the argument. And again, maybe that's a good argument. I tend to disagree. Young teams need to gel. Young teams need time to gel. It doesn't happen overnight. Even this vaunted offense is still in need of time to reach their potential. Face reality, this team is so young in so many positions, plus the injuries, plus underperforming vets. Be a true Cowboys fan through this crazy season and watch young players grow and look forward to a productive offseason. Fingers crossed because the Joneses are still in charge. We hit a mother load with Schotty, Adams as far as setting a sustainable future. Now we just need time. Yeah, I think that's fair. I think there are some criticisms of Schotty of what he's done up to this point, but so far as a collective, I think it's an A effort from Schottenheimer as a head coach, right? He's, it's not quite A plus. Maybe you can make an argument A minus, but the offense fantastic, culture fantastic, forcing changes on defense when necessary fantastic, right? I mean the penalties pre-snap and some other things like that, but they've gone through a lot of injuries, right? People talk about the pre-snap penalties. Guys, they've had 5 different starting offensive line combinations, a bunch of different receiver combinations with the injuries to Lamb and Turpin, having to go to Jaden Blue a little earlier, maybe they hope because of the injury to Sanders. Defense struggling, revolving door of guys hurt, Trevon Diggs drama, Micah Parsons drama. I mean, and Schottenheimer, to his credit, the entire way has put together a very good offense and a decent culture up to this point. There are still some flaws, obviously, still a lot of things to improve on. But considering the talent deficiency they have on defense, I mean, I agree, it's going to take time. There are no answers. There's no trade the Cowboys can make right now to improve their team in terms of getting it up to being a good defense or even an average defense. It just can't happen. If anyone out there is saying that, oh my goodness, if the Cowboys do these 3 things, they're going to be an average defense. Not going to happen, guys. Talent just isn't there. It just isn't there. Anyone that says, well, if they just do this scheme change and play this guy more and then trade for this guy, folks, let's look at the Bengals, right? They're the defense that is actually lower than Dallas in a lot of instances statistically, right? That Dallas and Cincinnati are neck and neck for worst defense in football title right now. They've got Hendrickson, who's a good pass rusher, right? They've spent I think they've spent 10 picks in the first 3 rounds over the last couple NFL drafts on the defense. I think 7 of 10 picks, something like that. There's some metric like that where they've been prioritizing the defense to the extreme. They changed their defensive coordinator as well. They still stink defensively. Sometimes it's just talent. Sometimes it just takes time, right? And as frustrating as it is, it's just the reality of the NFL. The Pittsburgh Steelers are 30th in the NFL in total defense right now. 30th. They spend more money on defense than anybody else by far. They made big-time defensive trades, big moves. Jalen Ramsey, first-round pick was defense, right? They invested heavy on the defense, right? They said, listen, Aaron Rodgers will add DK Metcalf, we'll swap Metcalf for Pickens, we'll throw Aaron Rodgers out there, he'll be the offense, and we're just going to throw all our money on defense. And they've been 30th in football in terms of overall team defense with stars, TJ Watt, Hayward, right? You look at Jalen Ramsey with Pittsburgh now, of course, and they spent a lot of draft capital, first round pick, on defense, like a lot of other picks for the defense. Again, and they're not too far behind Dallas in terms of yards per game allowed, in terms of being bad. So sometimes, guys, it's just there are no easy answers. Anyone who's saying there's an answer, there just isn't this year. There just isn't. It's just that simple. All right, this next comment is from Plague Doctor. So, all right, let's get ready for this dissertation in front of us here. All right, we have also had a long stretch of uneven games against Arizona going back to the late Jake Plummer era. Before that, we handled them far more consistently when they were still in our division. It makes me wonder why certain out-of-division teams end up being matchup problems over time. I understand how division rivalries can tilt, but it's less clear why it happens with teams we do not face as often. Seahawks are another one of those. Yeah, it's one of those weird things. There's weird anomalies that happen in the National Football League. I don't for example, Derek Carr. I think he played against Dallas, 3 times, if I remember correctly, and he has eviscerated Dallas in all 3 of those games, right? If he doesn't have that fumble, that famous game at the Raiders in 2017, in the end zone for the touchback, that would have been another big win for Derek Carr. He beat him on Thanksgiving. He beat him last year with the Saints. It's just Derek Carr owns Dallas. There's weird things. But then it flips, right? Then it flips, and just weird things happen. Remember, the Giants actually used to give the Cowboys a whole lot of trouble with the Eli Manning for a long time. And then at the end of the Eli Manning era and then the Daniel Jones era, it flips, right? So it's weird things can happen on a dime where just, gosh, you just can't beat this team. And then suddenly you dominate that team for a decade, and then it flips and they dominate you for a decade. The NFL can just be weird that way. It's just one of those bizarre things. I think as far as coaching goes, you kind of need a middle ground. I don't like the nonchalant, nonplussed approach Garrett and McCarthy took, but I also think you can carry blaming your players too far. I think Schotty has that middle ground between it's not that important, it's just a game, and our QB suck, and I'm not out there on the field to make plays. You can take blame and still not remove it entirely. Hopefully that wears off on Steven. I have no hope for Jerry there. I will say I was skeptical of the hiring as I wanted to see if we could get Gruden, and that's a whole can of worms I don't want to get into, but I'm glad we hired Schotty, which sounds silly at 3-4-1, but given what he has had to work with, I think that's a small miracle. I do kind of hate these middle-of-the-road years, not good enough to truly compete and not bad enough to tank for a top-5 pick, which is why I was saying if we want to truly rebuild, we can't win with Dak. He's too good to completely tank with. Not even sure we could with Milton. We need Trey Lance back. Yeah, I know it's way too early, but I do wonder if we're actually going to make a move in free agency. I don't see how you can roll into next year with a similar team plus some rookies and hope to do anything. You may as well trade or let Pickens walk and get a first, as the media suggesting, in that kind of scenario. Yeah, I understand a lot of your points, a lot of the concerns there. Yeah, middle of the road years, I will say, are frustrating, right? Because if the team is horrifically bad, right, then you're just like, if you're the New Orleans Saints, you're like, hey, let's see if our quarterback's any good, and then let's see what, maybe we go from the 1 overall quarterback next year, right? That's an example, right? You just ride it out. And listen, sometimes you can ride it out and get lucky, and you get, like the Patriots, they're horrifically bad for 2 years, and then they get Drake May, they have a lot of cap space, they add a lot of players, and suddenly, they get a favorable schedule, last place schedule, and suddenly they look pretty good again. We'll see how long that shakes out. But the reality is there's a lot of teams that are horribly bad for a long time. Cleveland comes to mind, and they never get out of it. The Lions were like that forever, right? They didn't really get out of it until they traded Matthew Stafford and got Jared Goff, and Dan Campbell came in and did his rebuild, right? So it's one of those things, the whole tanking, the accelerationism, right? The idea of, well, maybe we can make things better quicker if we go worse faster. And I'm not a big believer in that. I understand it's worked in some instances, but for the vast majority of cases, it doesn't. And so you end up with a lot of middle-of-the-road years where you're like, yeah, this isn't a playoff team, obviously. Maybe they get lucky and sneak in, right? I doubt it, right, at this point with the injuries and their poor defensive performance. If we're being fair, that's sort of my assessment. I think they're basically, I think they're not a good football team right now. They got a lot of young players. I'm excited to see how some of these guys play, of course, especially guys coming back from, IR in coming weeks. But the reality is they're just not a good football team. Schotty's talked about building a program, and it's going to take time. You don't trade away Micah Parsons for the cap space and the draft picks for short-term results, right? The goal was long-term success, right? They obviously want to win every week, but the goal is long-term success. You don't make that Micah Parsons trade if you have a short-term mindset. People forget that. The Dallas Cowboys, Schotty, the organization, they're thinking long-term. They're not thinking 2025, right? They want to win. Of course they want to win. But the reality is you don't trade an all-pro defender days before the season starts for draft picks and draft capital and Kenny Clark if you have a short-term mindset. You just don't. All All right, it's Juma 3231 writes, and to follow up on the Dak interceptions, while I agree that situationally it was a terrible decision to throw the seam to Ferg, Turpin was open for a TD, and both CD and Pickens were open at the sticks. I can also understand why he did it. He felt like 3 points isn't enough. If this was 2023, him and Ferg probably connect there, and we're singing a different tune. My main point being, while yes, it was a blunder, I like Dak's chances when he's being aggressive. We've seen him hit these types of throws, so it's easy for me to get over. While the second one felt like an interception out of the 49ers playoff game from a few years back. His feet were panicky, his eyes were all over the place, and the pressure forced a terrible ball that should have been thrown in the dirt or out of bounds. That being said, with the defense playing how it is, Dak has to manage being aggressive / protecting the football, which is up until this point he has done pretty well. Last thing I'll say is if we were playing a team with a strong pass rush, Schotty needs to do a better job calling screens, short and intermediate routes. This O-line is giving up pressure too fast for complex / deep route schemes. Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things because I think that a lot of defenses in terms of their coverages, and we've seen this over the past few weeks, I don't want to say are giving Dallas big play opportunities, but they're there, right? We saw the Washington just do this, for example. We saw the Jets do this. They're like, listen, we'll give you the big plays. And so as an offensive staff, it's so when you have guys like Pickens and Lamb and Turpin, you're like, man, I mean, the big plays are there. But I do agree with you. You got to juggle that a little bit. And I think that's something Schotty, I think, is trying to do, and I think has done a relatively good job of doing that. I just think he needs to, I agree, in certain situations, need to be more mindful of it. But listen, if you got a one-on-one deep shot with Pickens and Lamb, I mean, that basically, those one-on-one, they gave him the win in Washington. And there's a reason it was a tie in Green Bay, right? The fact that they could win one-on-one on those deep shots. So it's a weird juxtaposition to manage. I agree 100%. And that's Schotty's job and Adams' job to do that. All right, this next comment here is from Steven Vanover. I notice people tend to equate high draft picks with elite players. No, they are a chance at an elite player and not a great chance. 8 to 15% chance of an elite player from the top 15 picks, just a chance. Ergo, trading away all your talent for picks actually drains your talent rather than elevates it. Math sucks. So, I may have to do a little bit of an analytical dive on this. So the way teams approach it, generally speaking, and they have most teams have a very complex model. I don't know what Dallas does. But they basically look at a first-round pick as a sort of a probability of not being an elite player, but being a good, solid player, right? They hope for elite, but realistically, you can't expect, hey, we don't know if this guy's going to be an all-pro or not. We're just hoping he can be a good player for us. And they give it, roughly a 50% chance on average, depending on where it is in the draft and all these kind of other factors. So they look at it as a 50% chance of being a good, solid player. But it's more than that, right? It's the fact that as a rookie, based on the current collective bargaining agreement, you're very, very cheap. So if a good solid player, let's say, may go for $20 million on average, a rookie will go for about, at least on the average of his deal, a quarter of that, maybe even less. So it's one of those things over the life of his deal. So if you look at it from that perspective, right, first round picks are insanely valuable because it allows you to spend dollars in other areas. So let's look at the Micah Parsons trade just real quick and break this down. So Micah Parsons was going to get, we'll call it $45 million a year, just making the numbers easy. So you trade Micah Parsons for 2 first round picks, Kenny Clark. So you look at Kenny Clark's cap hit. Let's call Clark a good player, solid player, right? Clark is going to be $20 million against the cap next year. Parsons would have cost, let's say, $45. Making the numbers easy. I know that's not literal. I know there would have been some cap space maneuvering, but just bear with me here. So Kenny Clark's a good player, solid player for $20 million bucks. Parsons would have cost you 45. You save 25, so you can spend 20 million on another good player. Okay, so now you got 2 good solid players, and now you have 2 first round picks. Each of those has a 50% chance of being a good solid player. So the expected value of those 2 first round picks, 2 times 50% is 1, a good solid player. So you end up trading Parsons essentially for 3 good solid players. You trade an elite all-pro for 3 good solid players. That's the math, right? And that's what teams are going by. Now you can make an argument whether it's a good move or a bad move, but that's the logic behind it. All right, David Moses, 884 writes, the secondary is a lost cause this season. My hope is that the defensive line and linebackers can show improvement by the end of the year. I'm okay dying by the pass if I can at least stop the run. The problem is it doesn't really work that way because of the way teams marry the pass game and run game these days. I mean, teams throw out of every formation and run out of every formation. It becomes a tough situation, right? It's one of the reasons why if you look at defenses, it's kind of funny the way the modern NFL has worked. That it used to be you'd be a really good pass defense, but sometimes you'd be really bad against the run, right? It's honestly how it was a couple of years ago. But if you look at this season, right, the way things have shaken out across the National Football League, if you're bad at one thing, you're bad at everything. And if you're good at one thing, you're good at everything. It's really interesting how it's worked out as the NFL has transitioned to how offenses handle themselves so far, with a lot of play action, a lot of tight end usage, right? There's no longer the era of the defense, well, when the offenses and spread, we're in trouble, but when they're power and formation, we're good. you're kind of, because offenses use a lot of balanced formations these days, you're either good all the time or bad all the time. And Dallas right now, unfortunately, is bad all the time. David Lawrence, 8051, writes, my problem with Schotty's play calling is too much passing. We pass on second and goal from the 1. We pass on third and 1. We're the number 1 passing team on first down. He said we need to be able to run when people were expecting it. If you draft all these O-linemen in the first round, you need to make it a point every game to establish a legit run game. Yeah, I do think there's times where he's like that, and I do think that's a fair concern. That being said, you also have to, sort of keep people on their toes. I understand tendency breakers, right? They had that 4th and 1 touchdown pass to Lipke on a play action against the Carolina Panthers, right? So it's one of those things where, you want to run when teams are expecting it for sure, but does it make sense sometimes to try and catch them off guard? Can you outsmart yourself? Sure, but do you want to break tendencies? Yeah, you want to do that too. So it's a good balancing act, but I am with you. Generally, I'm like, listen, just run the ball with Javonte Williams 2 or 3 times in a row. If he doesn't get it, he doesn't get it, right? Just live with that result. I'd rather see that in some instances. And Jared Goldberg, 4904, writes, Clark would probably look better if the other 10 guys on defense would actually do their jobs. And that's a fair point, right? And I've actually got some analytics. I'm trying to put together some stuff for stat of the day, talking about how the Cowboys' actual run defense in terms of in the A gaps where Clark lives has actually been good this year. Right? It's actually been pretty good. It's just outside of that, things look bad. And Clark has, a smaller role in those situations. Still an important role, but a smaller role than he is, of course, with runs right up the middle, which is where he is. So I think Kenny Clark's a good, solid player. I really do. I don't think he's a star, and he gets paid a lot of money cap hit-wise over the next couple of years. But as a leader and as a good, solid player, listen, he's the best defensive tackle, run stuffer, run defender, I'll say it like that, in a long time. Certainly better than anything in 2023 and 2024. And certainly better than anything on the roster right now. And here's the thing. What Kenny Clark allows you to do, just on one final point here on Clark, is that he allows a guy like Solomon Thomas to kind of come in and be a disruptor, right? Because he'll do all the dirty work. He'll be kind of the more traditional player. And then you throw in Solomon Thomas for 1 every 5 plays as a guy who's, more willing to, jump around blocks, quick swim move, slant, things like that. A little bit of a longer player. And so it gets offensive linemen. You're so used to going up against a traditional solid defensive tackle, big, strong guy in the middle. And then you insert, kind of an X factor, a little different player in Solomon Thomas, and he can beat you and get a tackle for loss, right? There's a few people that are saying, like, Solomon Thomas is playing good. Why isn't he playing more? And he's playing a healthy amount. But I think it's the juxtaposition, right? You have Kenny Clark, who's sort of the battering ram. It's like we think of the running back position, right? Thunder, lightning, a battering ram for 80% of your snaps. And then for 20% of the snaps, you throw in the speed demon, and the speed demon looks great. The reality is because the defense is worn down, right? They're so used to tackling the battering ram that the speed demon goes by him. That's almost the effect we can see with Kenny Clark, right? You've got a battering ram inside as a defensive tackle. Solomon Thomas comes in and suddenly looks good. Mozzie Smith, for example, when he's come in, he's actually not been great by any means, but he's played a little bit better than what we've seen, in 2024, at least, from his position. And I think a lot of that is Kenny Clark being the battering ram. Again, it's sort of the, those lower level effects that don't get noticed in the box score in terms of watching the film that are why the Cowboys are so high on Kenny Clark and why the Packers really loved him too. He's just a good, solid football player, right? It's not an elite player, but he's a good, solid football player. All right, that's more than enough for today. I tell you what, there's just always a lot of stuff to get to, and I love the comments so much. It's one of those things I always try and talk about. Well, I want to get to more comments. I always want to say I'm leaving a lot of comments on the cutting room floor here, but I basically spend 2 hours talking about all the comments, which I feel like would be maybe a little too much. But listen, the Cowboys are going to be back at practice starting this afternoon. Of course, it's Wednesday. As they start trying to prepare for their Monday night matchup, there's a lot of concerns, a lot of issues, and we'll have to see what the Cowboys do. A lot of health concerns at the safety position and the secondary in general, and talent issues abundant, right? It's a challenge right now, guys, and I think now's the time to embrace the process and see what the Cowboys coaches and players can do with this adversity. It'll be something to certainly watch over the coming days, and I will be there to talk it through with you as always, starting tomorrow morning, of course. But until then, I'm Nick, and this is Saturday Morning Inspection.